Brilliant afternoon, everyone. So thank you for coming along to listen to my session, which is really focused on basket abandonment, but actually on the evolution of the sector. And there's been so much disruption in the sector, whether that's through Gen AI or whether that's the entrance from some of the big Chinese players like Shein or Temu, or whether that's just a much more complex customer journey. The industry is going through a transformational process, and actually customers' expectations are being driven higher than ever before. And so that's why it's absolutely critical for retailers to be able to focus on basket abandonment and try to reduce any friction point across the whole of the customer journey. Just a very quick introduction to me. I'm Richard Lim, CEO of Retail Economics. We work with a range of different clients, but essentially it's about putting economic analysis, econometric modeling, forecasts at the heart of what we do in the industry. We've teamed up with GFS to produce this piece of work. It's a second phase of what we've done around basket abandonment, but essentially it's a deep dive into the frictions of the customer journey and at that critical point of click, how businesses are trying to reduce those levels of abandonment. But what I just wanted to start on really was set the scene, give some context around the general macroeconomic environment, because we've been through waves of disruption within the economy. The cost of living crisis is still kind of a recent memory, and it was only 2 years ago that inflation was at 11%. We had a trust government where financial turmoil in the markets, interest rates looked like they were going up to 7% and beyond. So there was huge levels of disruption. And that cost of living crisis was a period of time where inflation outpaced earnings for 18 consecutive months, and actually it wiped off about £50 billion worth of spending from households in the UK. We're now on to what I would argue is almost like the second act of the cost of living crisis. So we're going through a period where interest rates are of course much higher, they're at 5%. And so there's a carousel of households that are going through this renewal of mortgages, and that's really squeezing people's disposable income. And if you look at the UK, there's 28 million households in the UK, about 30% of them have a mortgage, about 20% of them are in private rental, but this is a group of households, 50% of households that are seeing a real squeeze on incomes. The group that I would pick out in particular though is what I term aspirational millennials. So this is a group of households that have probably bought their first house in the last 12 years, they're only used to ultra low interest rates, they might have a car on PCP, 2 cars on PCP, kids in private school, but there's a kind of a group of consumers that are really feeling the squeeze. And against all of those kind of the economic backdrop, margins for retailers are under pressure, so they can ill afford to let sales slip through their fingers. And against the backdrop of the economic climate, we've also got the retail sector that continues to evolve at pace. And so there's just a kind of a high level schematic here of where we've been through as an industry. If you go back to the early 1990s, when I was a teenager, if I wanted to go out and buy a pair of jeans, I'd probably go into Burton's and I'd pick up what the limited assortment that they had there. I might even go and get my Kodak film, take it into Boots to get that developed, but it's a very one-dimensional experience. And then as you go on to multi-channel, retailers were experimenting with websites and spinning up websites, but it was still in kind of silos. They weren't really talking to each other. And then we went on to omnichannel. And omnichannel was a stage where really the smartphone was the thing that was the glue that helped consumers bounce between channels. And so the teenagers of today, unlike me, are being inspired on platforms like TikTok. They are experiencing brands in a different way, building relationships with brands in a different way. They might then go on to TikTok Shop and buy it in that enclosed ecosystem. But essentially the impact of digital is much stronger across all different stages of the customer journey. And actually, when you map that out, what you can see is that across different stages of the customer journey, there's a different level of impact. And so what this graph shows is for an under 45 age group, so what we kind of term digital natives, they've always been exposed to this kind of digital influence, but as they go through the different stages of the customer journey, there's different influences of digital and physical. So actually about 71% of customer journeys for non-food will start online. So this might be people researching, finding things on search engines, they might be discovering things on TikTok, they might be doing a price comparison, but then actually some of that will then go into store. So they want to go into store, touch, feel, experience the brand, and might end up buying in store. The reverse is also true though, where you've got 29% of people who are discovering things in store, but then they might go into online to then purchase it. But across the whole of the customer journey, consumers now unconsciously bounce between those physical and digital channels on that path to purchase of least resistance. And actually, if you look at sales in the UK, there's about £100 billion worth of e-commerce non-food sales in the UK, but about 50% of all of those non-food e-commerce sales will touch a physical destination at some point. So that might be discover in store and then buy online, or that might be buy online and then pick it up in store, like click and collect, or it might be returning to a store or a locker or something like that. But 50% of e-commerce sales of non-food at some point actually has an interaction with a physical destination. So with all of this going on, basket abandonment in context of a much more complex customer journey has risen up the agenda for retailers. They need to focus on this and think about how they're going to try to reduce those abandonment rates. When we did this piece of research last year, what we saw is that basket abandonment had cost the industry about £31.5 billion. This year, it's going to cost, last year, or in the last 12 months, it's going to cost the industry about £34.5 billion. So it's been about a 9% increase in the level of abandonment. And just to be clear, it isn't necessarily lost sales. This is consumers that get to the point of checkout and then they will go to a competitor where their delivery expectations can be met. So it's a displacement of sales from one retailer who can't meet expectations to another retailer that can around delivery options. And when we look at why basket abandonment measures, of course, it's really important. Every abandoned basket is potentially lost revenue for the retailer. And also post-COVID in particular, the cost per acquisition of customers has been driven much, much higher. So if you're going to invest in marketing expenditure to then bring those customers to your website, you certainly don't want to lose them because expectations around delivery aren't being met. Third thing is around the loyalty erosion. If people have a bad experience, then that has an implication in terms of loyalty. And also, that final mile has a big impact on the perception of the brand. If your delivery partner can't get it right, loses the parcel, there's a delay in delivery, of course that has a big implication on the perception of the brand and brand damage. And we think that there's three main reasons that we're seeing basket abandonment levels being driven up at the moment. I think technology is one of those key areas, and so I'll go back to how consumers feel like the consumers' expectations are higher. I think that what we are seeing in the industry is that they're being influenced by other areas where we're seeing technology play a real key role in reducing friction. So if we think about, for example, taxis and Uber's frictionless access to taxis, or we think about takeaways and the frictionless access to takeaways delivered by Deliveroo, or you think about Spotify and music, video content via YouTube, access to intelligence via ChatGPT. There's all of these different areas where technology is influencing the way that consumers think about brands, and that's permeating into the retail space. And so expectations are being driven higher there. Suppliers, The supplier network has become a much more complicated area, especially post-COVID. The investment in the delivery ecosystem was driven higher, lots of investment in retailers thinking about how to work with multiple carriers, so suppliers are struggling to get that right. And then the third thing around the economy, cost of living crisis, people have adopted a much more cautious approach before they are committed to their purchases. And so the cost of living has certainly played a role in delivering higher basket abandonment rates. And if you think about who's actually driving higher basket abandonment rates, what we've seen clearly with the research that we've done is that it's being driven by younger consumers and more affluent consumers. And I'll go back to the aspirational millennial point, is that they're more cautious about their personal finances, more nervous about committing to purchases, and that's being driven in particular by these two sets of consumers. And when you ask those consumers who've said, yes, I've increased my levels of basket abandonment, what you see is that over a third, 37% of consumers saying that the kind of greater financial caution has been one of the main reasons, but also they're not satisfied with delivery choice and delivery options, and people are also shopping around more in terms of looking for price comparisons, and then that might lead to deciding to leave at the point of checkout and go and check someone else out. And then the main reasons for people in terms of abandoning their basket comes down to cost, speed, and choice. And so there's about 80% of people that say they have abandoned something at the point of checkout because their expectation around cost has not been met. The same around 70% who say delivery times will take too long, and also lack of choice as well. But these are the three areas where we've seen, these are the three main areas that are really driving that kind of abandonment of basket. What's interesting is that if you look at the comparison with last year, what we've seen is that the level of abandonment has risen across all of those different areas. So actually, what's happened is that people have become more likely to abandon baskets across a wider range of options. They've just become more demanding, and that's something that we've seen through the data compared to the previous year. And then when we start thinking about trends and what's been driving some of these trends, I think one of the clear outcomes of this research is that it's being driven by younger consumers. These are clearly the consumers that are abandoning their baskets the most, but you can see there's a wide range across different categories as well. So, for example, Gen Zs, your typical Gen Zs, are abandoning about 40% of clothing and footwear baskets. And you can see clothing and footwear is that area where people are most likely to abandon baskets, but actually it's about 4 times the rates of older consumers. And then there's also a correlation between the age of consumers and also the frequency of online shopping. So what this graph shows is that across the bottom, in terms of people who shop more frequently, are more demanding when it comes to free delivery. So what this shows is that people who say they shop more than once a week online, about once a week online, about once a fortnight online, going across there, their expectation for free delivery is that they're not prepared to wait that long. So 2.7 days for free delivery, and the more frequent, the less frequently they shop, kind of the more less demanding they are of that. Choice matters. And so what came out of the research around delivery preferences is 4 really clear cohorts of consumers. We had consumers on the very left who we called like the dependable shoppers. Out of all of the delivery options, actually all they really wanted was reliability. They were prepared to sacrifice cost and speed and any expectations around sustainability as long as they got a reliable delivery. We had about 30% that we said were cost crusaders. These are people that were really focused on cost. That was the most important element of it. And you can see there by the profile of age, they were typically older consumers. We had about 20% of consumers who said it's all about choice. They wanted different options for delivery, whether that's next day delivery, time delivery, click and collect, delivery to locker. They wanted that choice to match different shopper missions, different categories, different price points, but choice to them was the most important aspect of it. And then express enthusiasts, where essentially it was all about speed, and there's about 17% of consumers that said that. And when you have a kind of a polar, a binary, is it about choice or is it about cost? On the far right, what you see is it's about 50-50. About 50% of people prioritize cost, 50% prioritize choice, but actually what that masks is underlying that, the difference between age and income. And so what we generally see is that cost is more important for older consumers, but especially the least affluent older consumers, but actually choice is more important for some of the younger generations and actually the more affluent generations. So they're more likely to want choice and actually potentially more prepared to pay for it. And when it comes to delivery, what do people actually want? On the left, you can see there, they want next day delivery, they want nominated delivery services, express delivery services, also standard delivery services at home. The ranking, you can see in brackets from 2023, so it hasn't really changed. The one thing that I would point out is lockers, and I think lockers is going to be one of those areas that we're likely to see rapidly increase in terms of the delivery options as lockers become more accessible to greater parts of the population. Returns, you can see there, home collection, return via post, return via drop-off destinations as well. And again, there's been a bit of a reordering of the hierarchy when it comes to what people want in terms of returns. But of course, returns being very important, especially in some categories like clothing and footwear, where actually you've got about 40% of what people buy in clothing and footwear are going back to the retailer. So actually getting it back in a seamless way that's cost effective for retailers, but also takes out the friction from consumers is a really important aspect. The third trend that we saw in the research is that actually it dispels this myth of people just want fast and they just want free. And actually what we saw is that consumers are willing to pay for premium delivery services. So actually 80% of consumers in the research said that they would consider paying for premium delivery services. There's about a third that said that they would only consider them in certain circumstances, but actually there's about 47%, almost half, are saying that they would consider to pay for premium delivery services. Of course, it gets really interesting when you start mapping this across different customer journeys. So people, for example, in a distress situation where they urgently need a product are more likely to pay for speed. If it's a gifting scenario where you're buying someone a hamper and it's getting delivered to them, then actually maybe it's a tracking service that they want and timed delivery slot so they can tell someone to be in when it arrives. If it's a luxury item, then people want to be able to track that because they've paid a lot of money for it. So there's certain shopper missions that really lend themselves well to people who are prepared to pay for that premium for it. And when you look across this, a lot of words, and I'll simplify it very quickly. Green is I'm willing to pay for it, red is I'm not willing to pay for it. But essentially you can see there in that top left, it's the under 45 most affluent group that actually are prepared to pay for returns, they're prepared to pay for premium delivery, they're more frequent online shoppers, and they want their delivery services quickly as well. And when you look at the bottom, the least affluent, over 45 age group, actually in terms of how much are they prepared to pay for returns on an average 25 to 40 pound order, 90 pence is the average, but that compares to £2.60 for the under 45s, the more affluent under 45s. So to wrap some of that up, abandonment is a critical thing for consumers to focus on because it's essentially lost sales. There's a big gap between the under 45s and the older 45s, and there's some differences between affluence as well. It is about delivery choice and convenience, but don't forget, consumers are willing to pay for these premium services, and also for retailers to organise, to offer a wide range of choices. So in terms of strategies for retailers, what do they need to do? What do they need to think about? I won't run through all of them here, but one of the biggest areas is that in order to have more delivery options, you need to work with more carrier partners. So to have a partner that who can consolidate that into one platform, a multi-carrier partner, is certainly one way to be able to do that. Rule of 5, one of the questions that we ask consumers is how many delivery options do they want, depending on a range of different shopper missions. It's actually 5, and if you compare that to consumers and if you compare that to retailers and what they offer, we looked at the top 50 UK online retailers. On average, they offer 3.5 delivery options. So actually there's this mismatch in expectations for the number of delivery options from retailers and consumers. Don't leave reliability to chance. Reliability is absolutely critical, the most important thing when it comes to delivery. Technology being an enabler of offering these types of services, and also returns being super important. So returns, for retailers to think about returns in the same way that they think about delivery. And actually, can they use a returns policy as a way to drive better loyalty as well? So, thank you very much. If you want a copy of the slides, that's my email address, so please do let me know. Otherwise, shameless plug, follow me on LinkedIn, contact me on LinkedIn, but more than happy to share the slides. Thank you very much.